So what's the deal with DMR then? Let's find out. So we're going to have a brief semi-technical talk on DMR without going into all the real depths of things. We're going to cover what it is, why, when and how. DMR is an open standard and it's defined by ETSI. Why the need for it? Well, we have analog FM repeater channels capable of carrying one signal at a time and occupying about 25 kilohertz. DMR can carry, I believe, 8 signals in a 12.5 kilohertz spacing. So here's the explanation again. An analog FM repeater will occupy typically 25 kilohertz up until a few years ago, where you've dropped to narrowband FM at 12.5 kilohertz. But it's basically each one 25 kilohertz block will carry one signal, whereas in DMR it uses time division multiplexing. So what that means is it breaks up time into small sections, and you put a signal onto your section, somebody else puts a signal onto their section, etc. I believe up to about 8 sections, and they're transmitted in data bursts, and at the far end the data bursts are decompiled to sections again, and then those sections which are carrying a digital signal convert them back to analog. So we could be using the equivalent of 8 conversations in a 12.5 kilohertz spacing. So how does it work? It works with time slots, colour codes, and here's a little bit of an explanation on how they're broken out. So we saw before the time slots carry like one conversation, and then the frames are in turn divided out, and we also have this thing called colour codes, which is the equivalent really to CTCSS on analog terms. So we would define a time slot where we're going to inject the signal on, and then within that time slot we would also have colour codes, which is the equivalent of CTCSS in the old school. So when did all this happen? Around about 2005. The ETSI standards were drawn up, and different manufacturers got on board in the commercial world and also the ham radio world very shortly afterwards. So how do we as ham radio operators implement this? Well, we use radios similar to the one in the top there. That will transmit an RF signal to either a hotspot or a repeater. So if you're lucky enough to have a repeater in your area, you would use the handheld or a mobile radio, even like a 25 watt or a 50 watt mobile in the car. You would transmit to a repeater in the normal manner, and the repeater would then feed your signal onto the internet to all the linked networks. If you didn't have a repeater in your area, you could have a hotspot in your house. A hotspot is it's a mini repeater. It's something like about a 10 milliwatt output power, typically in the UHF range. You would program your radio to communicate with the hotspot instead of the RF repeater, and the hotspot in your house would be connected to a power supply, which is typically a USB supply, and a data cable into your router. So you would transmit to that hotspot. The hotspot in turn is fed onto the internet via a router to all the other systems, typically by a system called Brandmeister. Now, one of the things with the hotspots as they've developed is they used to be simplex, which means that whilst you're receiving a signal from the internet and it's being rebroadcast from the hotspot to your radio, you cannot, with your radio, reset the hotspot. You have to wait for a quiet time when the hotspot is not transmitting. So with the newer equipments, there's duplex. So basically, if you're in the middle of a queue so that you're receiving some communication that's coming via the network and you want to change, all you have to do is hit the PTT and the hotspot will acknowledge, because it's able to receive you as well as just transmit. So that's the kind of different thing. So how do we do this? We have to program the radio with talk groups and time slots. There's a chart there. This is not exclusive. There are hundreds of talk groups. You could go to the Brandmeister webpage to see more detail. But basically, for each channel in the radio, you would program it with a time slot and a talk group. When you're using a hotspot, the time slot's always going to be the same, because it's whatever you've programmed from the hotspot, so it's only the access of your radio to the hotspot. But if you're going via a RF repeater, you might use time slot 2 or time slot 1. You have to have the information from the repeater owner, or from info that you can grab from the internet for that local repeater to you. So yeah, there's some talk groups. You would typically notate your channel with a usable name that you can display on the screen. There's some suggested there under the assignment column, and you're really not limited. You can access any country. You can access like your local area, your regional area, your province, your country, or worldwide, and anywhere between really. So it's just a case of looking up on the index what the talk group number is. So all of this information is programmed into a code plug. Now that's probably the trickiest part, because there's a bit of a learning curve there, but there is plenty on the internet already covering code plugs. And really with most of our radios, all the code plug software seems very, very similar. So it's like it's generic, and it's an implementation of it for each of the manufacturers. But if you can use one, I'm sure you'll be able to use the rest of them. So that's it.
So this video, if you like it, our video, comment down below a thumbs up.
Thanks for watching VA3SII. Bye.